Okie dokie. So as people come in, okay. So welcome guys to the Google Analytics 4 and TapClicks office hours for our customers. Today we have Brian Butler, who is going to be joining us to help speak to some of the topics that you see listed here on this slide for you guys. We will also be looking to get some, questions and stuff from you guys. Please feel free to use the Q&A section to make sure you guys have a chance to provide feedback or ask questions. If we don't get to it during the session, we will endeavor to get to as many of them as we can. But if we don't, if you feel comfortable, you can share who you are and where you're from. We can connect you to your CSM, or you can reach out directly to your CSM. But we also look to follow up on additional webinars because there's more. So with that, I will let us get started. For everyone here, we will start with the first topic and the first question of this is going to cover what is the biggest concern or question you'd like to ask a GA4 expert, or the GA4 expert as it was, because Brian's the guy. The first topic we're going to look to talk about is the TapClicks GA4 template, where to find it and how to use it. So I will hand the floor over to you, Brian. And
Awesome.
if you'd like to share your screen, let me know and I can stop sharing.
Can do. Go ahead and share quick. All right. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Brian Butler. I am a smart tech CEO, and I actually work with TapClicks directly on a lot of implementations, a lot of training. We are also a certified partner, so we have the ability to work with TapClicks in many different fashions, in training pre or post onboarding, I would say. So one of the things that we specialize in is kind of the weird stuff that people don't like to deal with. So TapClicks, onboarding, GA4, Google Tag Manager, HubSpot implementations, channelable feeds. We kind of specialize in the stuff that people hate. So it's a weird niche, but I think we fit pretty well in it. So one of the things that people have asked a lot about is about the new template that TapClicks has come out with, which I think is really impressive, and the team did a really good job on it. I will say from an implementation standpoint, there are some things I usually recommend for people to adapt to their own kind of benefits, but I'll show you a couple different things real quick. One of them is being how to access it. One of them is being how to access it as a section or as a brand new template, or how to modify it and customize it. So when you get into a new report, obviously the first thing you're going to get is a brand new report. The typical use case here is going to be as a section. So if you onboard this as a brand new section, you're going to see GA4 brought up as an option. If you don't see it immediately within your instance, what you can do is do a search by your filter. And then from this standpoint, you can usually come down to the analytics. So I'll do a quick search real quick, just to make sure I can find it. And here's your template right here. So the template has been pre-built. It does need some customization. So what you'll do is you'll click on it. You'll say use template. And then from this standpoint, you're going to see a lot of interesting things pop up. Now, originally, there was a couple of issues where some of the reports that had been built you were using data views that not everybody had access to as a default. And so what ends up happening with that is it causes a bit of a bug where a lot of the data that you pull in would either not populate or would populate in a kind of a funky way. So what I recommend for anybody who has already downloaded the GA4 template in the past is to actually remove it, delete it, and then re-download it, because any of the bugs that have been fixed from the initial implementation are pretty much gone and ready to go. The other thing I would think about is a couple of different functionalities. One, if you're going to present this to clients, you may want to remove the note section. This is really more for administrators so they can see it. I would recommend removing this before you show this to clients. kind of a no-brainer, but I think it's worth mentioning. The second thing that's really cool, and this is kind of a unknown, I feel like this is maybe a tip of the insider type. You can actually come into this really great media widget, and you can customize this and save this to be able to use elsewhere, which I think is really great. Little tip here, when you go to code view, you can actually look into the code and look at the color to understand what the overall color scheme is, whether you're looking at the background image, which in this case is a linear gradient. So like, for example, smart text branding has 3 pictures or 3 hash cues that are gradients. So you can update this to have your own branding in here from a gradient level, which is really cool. And then once you've updated this, you can actually take this media widget and you can save this and publish it to be able to use on other reports. So you just name it, put a description onto it, and then save it. It's highly recommended, because what the TapClicks implementation team does when they build these is they make a really great looking header that is almost impossible to recreate if you're trying to do it by yourself. So you leverage what the team already built here, modify this to meet your colors, save it as a template, and reuse it in other reports. It's just a no-brainer. The other thing I recommend for here is actually to modify these initial cues. And I mean this with love and respect to the people who built this, but as a marketer, these are not as useful to me personally as maybe a developer who's looking at the back end. They see what's available in the code and they're like, oh, these metrics look like they're going to be cool. The unfortunate part is that the true total users, active users, and engagement rate, if you're a user who logs into GA4 and you look at the standard level reporting that GA4 offers, these metrics are nowhere to be found. So if you're trying to relate this to a customer who has GA4, they don't have an in-depth implementation, they haven't customized their exploration tab, they're going to be kind of confused because they're going to go, why don't these numbers match? Why don't these match what I have in my GA? So it's one of those things where it's a small thing, right? It's something that it looks really attractive. What I actually recommend, and this is maybe again an insider tip, is recreate this field right here to make sure that you're using things like sessions, average session duration, and then even new users as a function you can access in the initial report. But take a look at your Google Analytics, and just, I have a demo instance here open, so you can see some basic data. But when you log in, you're going to see users, new users, average engagement time. These are some of the metrics. But as a weird thing in TapClicks, you can access new users, but users by itself is not an individual metric. It's a bit of a weird misnomer because new users is there, but total users did not mean users. It's kind of a funny one. But as you go into any of your detailed reports, like your overview report, most of the ones that you're going to see, like in a user acquisition report, are going to be new users, engaged sessions, engagement rate, and some of these kind of counts. And typically, when I'm speaking to clients and I'm talking through this, they don't typically have expansive reports going on here. So what I recommend is really building it to make sure you're mirroring as many of the features and as many of the metrics that you have in what is kind of a standard data view. So it's a small thing, but I recommend as you go in here to make a copy of this, or you can actually, edit it and you can physically see what the visuals look like. You can see the color, you can see the wrap, you can see literally what they use to build this with this really nice little outline. Try to mimic what these fields look like. So I would actually take a screenshot of this, make a new widget, because you can't duplicate this and have it be a different data view. And what I would actually do, and this is again, it's a little bit more of an advanced tip, but this is something I highly recommend to anybody who's trying to maximize this template. Go into your GA4 and under properties is where you're going to find your sessions. It's where you're going to find your engaged sessions. It's where you're going to find a lot more of your level 1 entry level metrics that someone who's brand new to GA4 is going to look at, recognize, look at their own instance and go, oh, I recognize that's 1-to-1. That data matches. So that's just something I recommend. New users, again, is right there. So you can literally bring in metrics that immediately go, oh, that matches. There's not a data irregularity there, which is ironically enough, one of the biggest complaints and biggest feedback that I get when working with clients is, hey, I'm looking at my GA4. I'm looking at my TapClicks and I'm seeing a lot of irregularities. Why don't these match? And as a reason is because total users is not the same as sessions. Total users is not the same as new users. And it's also not the same as users in the system. So not to belabor a point, but I think it's a really important point to bring up is that there is some personalization and customization as a marketer to make this template uniquely you and adaptable to a client where you're going to get an immediate positive response versus an immediate confusion. Hopefully there's no questions regarding that, but I think it's a really important point to bring up.
Yeah, so in general, Brian, while you like the template as a great starting point, your
Very
recommendation
good.
is to make sure you take the time to look at it
Yep.
and customize it to not only your branding, but
Yep.
also your client base's interaction with GA4. If they're a basic interactor, give them the basic metrics. If they're someone
Yep.
that's a little bit more higher up and technical, maybe, spring for adding a little bit more detail here and there to make sure you hit
Exactly.
those use cases.
And there's a lot of really good in-depth metrics in here. Um, and I think those can be definitely be leveraged, but I would definitely approach this in the way of, as a marketer, what is the most valuable part of this that you're going to want to customize to make sure your client gets the most out of it? Because, like, for example, pardon me, for lead gen clients, this monetization section isn't useful. So what you have to do is just customize this. And that way you can maximize the availability. And one thing I will say, maybe some people don't realize it, you can take this template, import it into your report, and you can chop it up all you want. And it will not edit the template that's in the system. So you don't have to worry about, accidentally, overriding this in a way that you don't like. But what I would recommend is that you actually save your own version of this template. So once you've customized this to be client friendly, you've removed some of the wordage, the verbiage, you've maximized the efficiency as far as what you want to report, what data, you can always come back up here and then you can say publish to library. And then I would actually publish the entire section and rename this to your brand GA4 overview. And that way, when you go back into the template, you can download your version of this template that has been customized to your needs in a way where you can, simply access it. Your team members can simply access it, and it just makes it a lot more duplicatable in its usage.
Makes it so it's a quick installation when you add GA4 to an existing client's
Yep.
dashboard. Or if you're looking to add in that new client and you want to get them a TapClicks dashboard up to speed quick, I think that's a great helpful hint, not just for GA4, but for TapClicks in general. Create
Yep.
your reports for your different channels and publish them to your library, and then you can quickly create dashboards as needed.
Another quick tip that might be a good one to review for people is if you don't already know, there's a really great feature inside of TapClicks where if a lot of clients don't have GA4 configured yet, or if you haven't had access to it, these reports are great to have like in a master dashboard. And then from that standpoint, you can manage your sections. And then from here, you can actually assign this to a specific data source. So you can go into your Google Analytics and make sure that this is mapped directly to this specific report, as you can see with the little logo up top here. And the beautiful thing about here is you can add this new revised template to your master templates, all your master dashboards. And if the client logs in without GA4 being connected, this will just simply disappear. And you don't have to worry about trying to recreate this and customize it for every single report. This one functionality can save you 6 to 7 different hours of trying to customize all these different reports. So it's hugely beneficial.
Yeah, it allows you to create that, like you said, a master dashboard that is useful across all your client bases, and not have to worry about showing them things that they don't necessarily have access to.
Yep.
So in this, we've talked a lot about metrics and all the different things that are available to the people within this and how we would customize this template. Brian, what if they're looking for something that's more along the lines of like a custom dimension? What are they, I think, from a kind of high level, and where would they go to about finding them within TapClicks?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a couple of different metrics that you kind of have to apply inside of GA4 in order to make use of them inside of TapClicks. We had a good use case actually that came up yesterday. Someone said, hey, I want to look at brand new users, right? New users as a filterable metric that I can look at. The challenge though is that they want to look at it as an audience name. And that's kind of a weird dichotomy of how those metrics work together. So there's a couple of things that you can do. One inside of GA, making sure that you have those customizations created. So if you haven't done any kind of custom metrics or custom dimensions, pardon me, you can go into your admin section in GA, and then from here down in the audience area or the custom dimensions area, you can actually make some pretty nice customizations. Now, the audiences is where you would bring in your new audiences. This could be your average time on site clients, your repeat visitors, your transactions from clients who have purchased 2 or 3 times. And as of yesterday, this dimension name of audience name, we had someone who wanted to filter specifically by a audience, but they didn't have the audience created yet. And so you have to come in here and make sure you're creating your new audiences. Typically, as part of your GA4 implementation, your migration, I should say, you will typically use a migration tool to take your audiences from GA3 and migrate them into GA4. If you don't know how to do that, we should probably talk, because that's a pretty standard part of your GA3 migration to GA4, and that's something we can help you with. But it is something that should be handled and should be updated so that you keep all that great, audience data. As you're looking at this, these new audiences can be created. And then once they're created, that's actually where you can come into your system. And like, for example, here, you can create a new widget leveraging that audience data. So let me go ahead and just do a quick view for you here. GA4. So under your audience dimensions is where you would access your details here. And then under account name, which is going to be your, your audience name, is where you're going to be able to access that data. So we'll add audience name in here real quick. So what you can see here is this audience data can be brought in. And if you want to look, for example, at how many users or how many sessions are part of that audience, you can bring that data in as well. And then from that standpoint, you'll be able to see, what that visualization, looks like. So for example, if we have a data view here, we can actually see the audience name at play, how many sessions it had. And as long as you're using the audience name as a dimension, you can filter by that dimension. So like in our example here, if I wanted to filter by purchasers, so I only wanted to look at sessions by purchasers, I could do that using the audience details filter. But the point is you have to create that filter or that audience inside of GA4 first. It's just, kind of a, point of order. The other thing you can create is custom dimensions. Now, the one challenge that you have with GA3 to GA4 is the absence of custom calculations. And this becomes really problematic when you're trying to figure out, different in-depth calculations. One common one that I've used before was actually cost to acquire, but using a goal as that element. Very challenging metric that you don't typically get in GA. And Google Analytics 4 does not have the custom calculation feature. So what we're going to do is actually show you how to create the custom dimensions, custom metrics, but then what you can then use is leveraging TapClicks' custom calculation function. And that is available to really kind of maximize what GA4 misses, really. So real quick, what you can see here is your dimensions are going to be here. So custom dimensions are usually going to be built based off an event. So either a user, an item, an event. This is typically going to be a data layer that you bring in through like Google Tag Manager or a custom dimension. Once you've built that data layer inside of your system, you can make sure you're copying the name from that data layer in Tag Manager into here, and then bring that data in, and you can figure out what parameter you want that to showcase. So, for example, I'm trying to think of a really good example on this that would be a good modifier. So one example I can think of is going to say a dimension name is a Salesforce ID, an SFID. Your Salesforce ID doesn't always have the ability to transition back into Google Analytics, right? But if you have your Salesforce IDs that you're leveraging and you want to look at your data based on that Salesforce ID, it's going to be kind of hard to do that on a standard implementation. But if you can get your developer to have a data layer capture that Salesforce ID inside of your code, you can use Tag Manager to actually create that now as a custom dimension, as an event. Using that event, you can then create that dimension and maximize that data here, and then assign a different parameter to it. So Salesforce ID would probably be like a user ID, a link ID, or a form ID, depending on what you're trying to bring in. And if there's any, issues you're having with developer resources, not understanding what a data layer is, not understanding what Tag Manager is, that's the kind of stuff we can help you out with as well. We have a really good team of developers that maximize those efficiencies. So the other thing you have is metrics. So custom metric, again, is going to be very similar to, those data points, but maybe it's a cost metric, maybe it's a weight metric, maybe you have an e-commerce site where you sell a product that has a very distinct weight, and you need to bring in that weight so it can adapt for what your shipping cost is, and you want to create a custom calculation. Custom metrics would allow you to do that in a way where Google Analytics can apply that. Now, the thing you can, maximize with TapClicks is inside the system. When you bring those custom metrics and custom dimensions in, that's where you can bring those data points inside of TapClicks and then use the calculations feature. Let me see if I can figure it out here. Calculations. And inside the calculations feature, you can bring those data metrics in, those data points, and whether it's at a channel level or whether it's at a data source level, you can build a custom calculation to maximize and map out those details. So in my case, it was taking your goal, maximizing what your cost per acquisition is based on a specific goal, and then using those dimensions to create a custom formula. But you're using those custom dimensions that you created in GA4 that you're now mapping in and creating a custom calculation based on those details.
Yeah, so with those custom dimensions, what I will call out is just from a TapClicks insider perspective, is those custom dimensions and those custom metrics are things that TapClicks support, obviously, as Brian mentioned. But there are a couple different ways on which we can accomplish that information and get you that information. So the path one is our do-it-yourself data views, which some of you probably know of or are familiar with. And they are those data views that we can build out for you on our side. And we can have whatever dimensions you prefer and what the metric set that you prefer. We currently support custom dimensions within the do-it-yourself data views. We are working on delivering support for the custom metrics, but that is not there yet. What I will say is if you are a client who is familiar or a user who is familiar with our live connectors or our on-demand data, you can get your custom dimensions and your custom metrics right now. So if you're going to use a live call widget on your dashboard, you can use the data view or the data category, as it's called, for custom. And in that custom data view, that data view is literally every single dimension and metric that is available via the Google Analytics 4 API. So in there, you'll be able to see all of the different dimensions and metrics you've defined. What I will call out as a user tip is when you're building those, make sure you assign a property, because in Google Analytics 4, custom dimensions and metrics can be specific to a property. So from one property to another property, they can be different. So when you're using the live call data, you're going to need to specify a property.
And Catherine, do you think people understand how to access the live data? Because it's kind of a newer field, a newer feature.
So it's fairly new from a global standpoint, yes. So it is a little tricky. As you can see here on Brian's screen, we have this toggle at the top called Use Data Cloud. If you don't know what the data cloud is, we can answer that for you. So the data cloud is what we refer to our stored data set. So that daily aggregate data. If you shut that off, you're now making a live call. So that means as you define your widget, we're going to be making an on-demand call to the API you specify to get you your data. It is a more flexible way to get more flexible way to get you the information that you're looking for.
Now, live widgets can be used on multiple different data sources, right? But not all data sources. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yes. So we currently have in TapClicks 19 different services that have live versions. We are working on expanding that list. If you have, needs for things, please reach to your CSMs. We can get them in the queue. But for Google Analytics 4, we made it a priority because we know Google Analytics 4 data was going to be needed for all of our clients, right? That's why we're all here today to talk to GA4, because it is so top of mind. So when we built out this data set, we wanted to make sure we had it in every way we could get it. That is to be said of the other, so Universal Analytics, the other Google Analytics. And then we also have others like Facebook and Microsoft ads and things like that. If you're curious about the list of live connectors that are available to you, they are available on our website in the connectors section.
One cool thing about the filter, the live call is it does have a bit of a different user interface, because when you go through the process, there is a filter functionality built in, pretty much right into the initial the widget building, data set dashboard here. And what's interesting about it is this is very similar to the wildcard functionality you get in a typical filter, where you can actually leverage your wildcard functions. If you don't enter the wildcard, it kind of has like a contains if that functionality. So the nice thing here is you can filter sessions minimum to sessions maximum, because I'm using metrics. If it's a dimension, you can filter by the name of it. So if I were to create an audience name, bringing in different audiences, and like I mentioned earlier, filtering by a specific audience name like purchasers, you could do that through the filter right in the live call widget, build out here. So you can kind of see the visuals there. And even though it's a live call widget, you can still customize all your styles and all your details. As a marketer, I can tell you I typically use live call widgets for information where we want to have a client who has more of an immediate need to see data. So by standard definition, TapClicks' stored data is usually a little bit of a latent data set, because it pulls at like 3 a.m. PST, 3 a.m. in the morning PST. So if you're looking at that data at like 9 o'clock, I can tell you a lot of our data is so rich and so thick that it takes hours to pull everything conclusively, right? So by 9 o'clock in the morning, when team members are starting to roll in, that data isn't necessarily 100% congruent for the prior day. And so it's important to understand how long your data takes to load. And if that data that you're loading isn't complete by that time frame, understanding what that looks like. And if you're one of those situations where the data is just taking a while to load, or you're not quite ready, but you need to show data, or a client really wants to see today's data, the live call widgets are kind of a game changer, because you can actually pull up today's spend and have a visual for today's information that you otherwise couldn't really get through the stored data because of the time of when that data is pulled. Go back into a data mode here. It's a lot prettier to look at.
Also, another kind of reason you would use this live call data is we have found, and Google has publicized, that there are some metrics that, when looking at data broken out by day, become essentially non-aggregable. And what I mean by that is, if we were to look at, say, users or sessions, due to the way that Google Analytics 4 now operates and totals those values on their side, they are what TapClicks refers to as unique fields, which means they come through for a day and they're unique to that day and only that day. So if you were to look at those data points broken out by day, the day value will match. However, if you're looking at a date range and totaling the number of sessions over a date range, it will look a little inflated. We strongly suggest using our live call widgets to accomplish a more accurate reporting result for the values and the fields, such as sessions and users, because we want to make sure you have the best reporting experience possible. Because that on-demand call to the API will get the most current value straight from Google Analytics without having to reference data that has been stored over a time period on individual days.
Yeah, super valuable. And Catherine, do you want to talk about the current data boundaries? That's something that I think is pretty fantastic that you guys brought into the picture.
Yeah, so for Google Analytics 4, as most of you know, Google has come out and stated that they're only going to make data available for up to 14 months, and a rolling 14 months, to be clear. So 14 months from today back, we have data available to us in the API and to you in the UI of Google Analytics 4. However, due to the fact that TapClicks, once you connect your data and assign your various properties to your clients within our system, the data pulls daily and stores in perpetuity until you tell us you want to delete it. So if you migrated to GA4, say at the beginning of this year, and you didn't map or assign your properties until the end of the year, we'll get all that data, right? Because that's covered in the 14 months. But if you actually, instead of migrating at the beginning of this year, migrated earlier than that and you connected earlier, we will still have that data even if, Google may not make it available any longer, because at the time it was available. So we pulled it in and stored it, and we keep it. So if you're looking to do year-over-year reporting, TapClicks is a helpful solution for those things, because we offer that longer history because we store it for you. We become your data warehouse for your Google Analytics 4 data. There is a limitation though, however, that only works for stored. Live calls will be bound by that 14-month limitation because it is an on-demand call to the API rather than a daily reoccurring fetch to get your data. So that is something helpful to note as well.
What's really interesting is how you guys have adapted the issues of duplicate data. So this is something that comes up on a lot of the implementation calls that I participate in, and a lot of the client calls that I deal with at Smart Tech a lot. So a lot of clients who have implemented Google Analytics have also implemented GA4 at some point in time. And a lot of people don't realize GA4 has been able to be implemented technically for 2 years. It goes back a long time. And so what we found is that people have tried building a channel set where you take sessions and you try to make sure that your session data in a time lag, you're looking at your session time frame, right? What ends up happening currently and until recently is those sessions would be duplicated every time you built a channel that had GA and GA4 because your sessions were technically being double counted in GA and GA4 during a specific time frame. And that was the time frame at which you had both implemented. So what's really great is that the engineering team and the technical team at TapClicks have actually built what's called a data boundary. And so you can actually build a start date for when you started your Google Analytics data collection. And this can go back pretty far for when you started bringing in that data. And then when your Google Analytics became no longer the source of truth, would be essentially when you activated and properly implemented your GA4 data. And by properly implemented, I mean, sometimes a lot of situations where GA4 is implemented is inaccurate. A lot of purchase revenue, we've seen a lot of clients who have implemented GA transaction revenue data where it captures one transaction and not multiple transactions or the full transaction because they kept the previous data layers in place when they implemented GA4 that were happening with GA3, but the dimensions and all the details, the developers have to go in and update all those metrics. So if your developer just said, it's just the same thing, I'm just going to implement new GA code and leave all my transaction data alone, you're not accurate, right? So you want to make sure you're troubleshooting. You want to make sure you're actively comparing like how much you spent in your account versus how much you made, and does it match in your Google Analytics? So if your revenue is 50% off, it's not accurate. You're not going to want to count it as your source of truth. So really make sure to use this time frame to troubleshoot and make sure your source of truth is accurate. And then once you've reached that point of accuracy, then I would put that as your end date for your Google Analytics and start your data migration here on the date where you have confirmed everything is accurate and current and you trust the data. And that way, what you have is a consistent line of data. Now, I will say it'd be inadvisable for me to say that sessions are sessions in both platforms. They're counted differently. They're looked at differently. Google does not consider them to be the exact same metric. So if you're looking at apples to apples for GA4 and GA3, it's typically not going to match. But if you want to have that blended data, you have to be at least aware that the data is going to be somewhat discrepant. And if you're okay with that, then go ahead and create a blended data set, have that really pretty report that looks at your data across time. And I think you'll be able to use it, but just be mindful of what you're actually reporting is not 100% apples to apples. It's like an apple versus a green apple. It's not 100% the same, though it looks similar.
Looks similar,
this
yeah.
is a great feature.
I'll also call out with that, because you called out sessions or not sessions. It's apples to oranges or apples to, Granny Smith. We do on TapClicks have resources about what is one-to-one, what is there that links out to Google's own documentation. So if you ever have questions about what Google has said is one-to-one and what matches and what doesn't, Google has some great documentation, and TapClicks has those easy links for you on our various collateral on our GA4 landing page.
Very nice.
Another thing I will call out for you guys, GA4, with it, you guys lost a level of granularity to some respects. So in Universal Analytics, you had a property and then you had a view. So you had a way to divide the data of a property into multiple different views if you wanted to, right? We know our users were using that because that's how TapClicks assigned your data, is by the view. With GA4, it's now at the property level, right? So it makes it a little bit higher functionality, brings things up. Where that gets to be a struggle is if the property is, say, a franchise business, right? And you have multiple locations, and you need to be able to report on those individual locations separately and not as an aggregate total. What TapClicks has done, which is something we offered with Universal Analytics as well, is what we call second level mapping or level 2 mapping. What this is a way for you guys as users to define a dimension that you want to be able to report on your data by. So if you have a property that is, say, my travel agency, right? And you have various different locations for the travel agency. You want to be able to map by location. And in there, you have your locations broken out as page paths. We at TapClicks can work with you to enable a second level mapping by page path, which will then allow you to map the individual locations and pull all the data that is relating specifically to that page path. If you're using streams, we can use streams. Basically, the way it was built was if you have a dimension that you want to be able to segment and filter your data to be able to report on individual points, we can help you. If you have questions about what that means for you and if it's something that you could be using, please do reach to your CSMs and they can help talk through those things with you and with the implementation team as well, as we find it's going to be a big need for a lot of people in order to get to that granular data set that they were previously used to. So,
good point.
Yeah, it's just, views. They were helpful in dividing the data set down. And without it, we wanted to make sure that users had a way to get to that data. So we prioritized that secondary level mapping so that you guys could get to that information. So with all that, speaking of the second level mappings and all the various different things that we have so far, Brian, what are your kind of ideas and thoughts around where the scalability limitations kind of come in when it comes to GA4, and how can TapClicks help work around some of that?
Good question.
So it's a big one that I just threw at you.
Yeah, I don't really have a prepared answer for that. I think for me, the scalability that TapClicks always brings is the fact that you can unify data as kind of a standardized model. And really what you get with the template that TapClicks put together is something that you can use to create a very scalable, very usable master version, as we talked about earlier, that you can use across a really large scale of clients. I was talking about this with a client earlier who had, a lot of issues where in their position of scale, they had a lot of, let's call it scope creep, where they'd have reports that they would have built, and you'd have, little things that need to be changed for every single little report. And we ended up having these reports that were customized to a point where, if one thing changed and nobody knew it, it was really hard to keep up with all the maintenance of it. So I think for me, GA4 has a lot of limitations as far as what it brings to the table compared to Google Analytics GA3 or UA. And I think those challenges are kind of multilateral, right? One of those elements is being able to take that data into TapClicks, make a master dashboard, and really kind of visualize that across all the clients you can possibly, configure, as long as those metrics are, consistent. And I usually look at that as a categorical level. So like e-commerce is going to be a different category than say B2B. And so the template needs to be customized to that category. But once you've done that, most of your clients are going to fit into a categorical level, right? They're going to fit into B2B, lead gen, or they're going to fit into like a multi-location franchise where you're looking at different franchise level data. That information, you can use as a customized kind of categorical template. And then to answer your question directly in GA4, I think Google has done an interesting service to the clients where they built GA4 in a way where it is, ironically enough, not built for a user who doesn't want to customize. And you have to learn a whole new user interface to understand how to access different metrics. And using GA4 or GAUA, it was built to be accessible to the average user who wasn't a marketing guru, right? The average consumer who wasn't, spending hours of their time trying to create custom visualizations and custom dimensions. And it's funny because as Google Ads has gone the opposite direction, they are simplifying and automating to the point of trying to make, unique thought irrelevant. It's the opposite on GA4, which is where they try to make it so customized that you have to be, a minor in marketing to be able to understand what you're even building. And I think it's a really interesting dichotomy that Google has brought to the table with what they're doing in the two different platforms and how they're applying that. So what I would typically say is that as a user who's been 15 years in Google Analytics GA3, it is one of those elements where I don't necessarily find it valuable to create custom reports in GA4 when you can do easier, more templated, more scalable models inside of TapClicks. So the reporting, the exploration tab inside of GA4 is a very complex way to create reports that you can create inside of TapClicks with a couple of just quick templated, widget pulls. And so I would say for anybody who's using TapClicks and GA4, if you're not using them together, you're kind of missing the boat. If you want to learn how to use the exploration tool to build custom widgets, you really kind of have to reverse analyze what it is you enjoyed about your prior templates in GA3. Look through your prior templates in GA3 that you use often and think about what the dimensions are, what the metrics are that you're leveraging, what the filter down point is. Are you looking just at paid media? Are you looking just at organic? Are you looking just at, at email? And you kind of have to go through a whole thought process, a thought experiment really of what you want to do to build that. In TapClicks, you don't have to do that. They've already done a lot of that thought exercise for you. And so that allows you to kind of just take what they've already done and scale it to a point where you don't have to necessarily be, relearning that other tool to a degree where you can try to get something usable. Because it's out of the box, it's very un-user friendly. And it's very limiting, and I'm not a pessimist. I'm very much an optimist in most cases, and in all cases really. But I do find that what TapClicks has done as a layer on top of GA4 is bring back that level of simplicity and accessibility that GA3 had, where you could just kind of map around and find useful data without even having to think about it. And you don't get that functionality now, which is something where I think having TapClicks to your benefit is just it's a resource that is underutilized if you're not connecting the two and building your templates. That answer your question a little bit? I think it may be a rambling answer, but it tried to get to the right point.
No, I think it covers things in that, the long and short of it is Google Analytics 4 is a lot more complicated. It's a lot more customizable, which is great. Lets everyone have their own experience within the system, lets people get to the true data points that you want to be able to get to when you're looking at, your marketing and your information and the various people interacting. I think that is valuable and it's very helpful for a lot of people where that gets difficult is when you go to your end client reporting, which is where TapClicks helps you scale, makes it a little easier, makes it friendlier.
Yep.
It's less overwhelming for a non-marketer or for someone who is not familiar with, GA4. It really helps kind of pull the conversation up to that more 30,000, foot view rather than keeping everyone in the weeds. Because as we know, I mean, I could talk in the weeds all day long because I'm a product manager who, who loves to talk in the weeds constantly. However, that's not necessarily the conversation you want to have with your client base, right? The conversations you want to have are more tactical. They're more high level about this is what we're able, like what we're accomplishing now for you today. This is where we can get you if we do X, Y, and Z. And I think that's more where the conversation goes these days with clients. And if TapClicks is a way to help you do that, we definitely want, we don't want to to our own horn too hard, but we definitely want to make sure that we are that more simplified user experience. So it's nice to hear from an outside perspective. With that and all that customization, are there any concerns with the migration process and those various different, custom events you have to create and things like that, or helpful hints that you can kind of provide our users with the last kind of couple minutes here about the various things that are kind of helpful when you start the customization?
Sure. So, by customizing, or do we mean like more of the migration and making sure that things are implemented correctly?
I would say more of um, probably more along the line of making sure things after migration are actually customized the way they should be.
Gotcha. So challenges with that. Um, I would say your best source of truth is what you're most used to, in that you can look at GA3 still. And I can tell you personally, I have not seen data stop calculating in GA3 as of yet. My instances that I have are still calculating data, though I have heard through the grapevine of other people who have seen their GAs stop accruing data. So I would
Hmm.
say as of now, really regardless of whether it's still accruing or not, take a look at your dimensions that you're leveraging a lot in there and try to make sure that you have access to that in a way through a widget in TapClicks. Really kind of leverage the connectors marketplace, the connectors tool. So as maybe a example of that, let me share my screen again. I'll just kind of give a visual because I think it's underutilized maybe. So I would say, to answer your question directly, this is probably your best resource that you could ever really get in this process. So the customizations that you're going to be looking for are going to be built out into stored metrics or on-demand metrics. And what you really need to think about is, what are you actively using in GA3 now? What reports do you build? What are you commonly, referencing? And then, look through the process here and understand, is that metric available through a stored metric, or is it available through a on-demand metric? An example of this that I think is really important is when it comes to e-commerce clients, transactions, and item level data. In Google Ads, I'm sorry, Google Analytics, GA3, you could actually get down to the user level, the product level, and you could see
Mm-hmm.
what products were selling on which day. You could see out of those products what the average revenue was, what the tax and shipping was. And please, Catherine, correct me if I'm wrong. Those kind of level of metrics don't tend to be available in the stored data, but they tend to be available in the on-demand data when you're looking at that kind of data set. And I don't know if it's because of what Catherine talked about earlier, where the data that you pull in that you can store and aggregate doesn't store correctly, or whether it's more of just a limitation behind the pull. But realistically, that's been something that, as a challenge, and I will definitely give you a moment to speak to that, Kathy, because I want to hear your feedback on that. But it's something that for e-commerce clients, that's the biggest feedback we've gotten, is that the in-depth item level data has been challenging to acquire and pull in. And so we, trying to find solutions around that. But that's one of those things where, as an example of what I mentioned, understanding what it is that's most important to you about GA3, and then talking with your team at TapClicks to make sure that you can access that data and not being afraid to ask if that's just hidden data that you don't, you know, because there's a lot of metrics and dimensions that come with GA4. These data views are quite vast. And again, if we turn on every single data view, your platform would take hours and hours to load and it would be hyper inefficient. So really making sure you're bringing in the right data at the right time is going to be such a valuable metric that you definitely want to be aware of what those demos are. Catherine, what was your feedback on the user transaction data?
Yeah, so the limitation around the transaction data is actually not API based or data based, really, to be
Oh,
honest. The limitation there is when we built the connector and we were building out iterative data views, transaction data wasn't available in the API as of yet. So it just wasn't necessarily something that came top of pile at the outset because it wasn't there.
yeah.
However, it's there now, obviously, and it's definitely something we want to make sure we get to is that item level data because it is such a e-commerce is such a powerful vertical these days for a lot of people, and we want to make sure that we're reporting against it. So there
Yep.
is plans to make an item level default date, like a turn on
Data
data
view.
view
Nice.
for the team. As of right now, if you are looking for that kind of information, you can leverage our do-it-yourself data views with your CSMs to
Mm.
get you that information. It's not blocked by, any kind of restriction in how the data comes in. It just truly is as it was not available when we built and we iterated. So it's just something we need to look to continue our iteration of our connector to make sure we're the latest and greatest.
That's a good point actually to bring up. I think that people may not realize is that the Google Analytics 4 API was kind of an evolving ecosystem when it first came out. And TapClicks was
It
one of the
was.
first people to actually get that API integrated and start building around it. So all credit where it's due. They did a really good job of getting everything lined out, getting the basic infrastructure in play. But to be honest, it wasn't really until GA3 was sunset officially that the API kind of opened up and allowed for the TapClicks engineering team to have better, clear, more visible data access to what was really available. And we are seeing iterations from Google coming out about the iterations of what's happening on GA4 and how now that their resources are being fully applied to that tool, you're going to start seeing different iteratives come through. So,
Mhm.
giving credit where it's due and also giving grace where it's due. If you guys are having challenges with the GA4 ecosystem in TapClicks, metrics aren't available, try to have a little bit of grace because the team is working as fast as they can and they're bringing in new data sets as much as they can. But it's one of those things where you're kind of limited at the very beginning with what Google provides. And then as they provide more data, that has to be brought in and integrated in. So it's something they have been really, really pivotal in bringing in and kind of a forebearer in this whole instance. But it isn't perfect because Google is still bringing out that data. So just, for any of you who are talking to your CSMs about this stuff, have a little grace. It's one of those things where there's a lot happening at one time and a lot of data is being brought in, and what you're asking for is probably available somewhere, but someone hasn't thought about it yet. So bring up those good questions, but also have a little bit of grace on that because it is something that we're working through.
Yeah, and with that, um, I will echo if you have questions, please do raise them with your CSMs. Any kind of feedback, we would love to hear it. If you have any, use cases or needs to get to Brian and his team, we're here to be a conduit to get you over for his expertise because it is vast over there. He knows very much the system and how it all works, and he can definitely help you. So thank you all for joining. I will remind you that this webinar office hours will happen again next week on Thursday. All the times are on our website, and we look forward to seeing all of you and answering all of your questions on the next session. Thank you guys, and thank you very much, Brian. We appreciate your
Pleasure. Thank you for
time
your
and
time.
your insights.
Pleasure. Happy to be here. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining.